In a league full of narratives, the NBA doesn't want you to know the truth about their villains. What's up, guys? It's Colin from Next Man Up, and today I want to talk about the villains of the NBA. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, there's a couple of dynamics that have existed off the court in the NBA for decades. One of the most popular being heroes and villains. At the end of the day, the NBA is entertainment, and there's nothing we love more in entertainment than a story of heroes battling their villains. So many players take a role of one or the other. The villains of the NBA are often players who embrace that role. Villains might be loudmouths off the court, disruptors of the game, or generally unlikable figures that are a part of the NBA. There's many reasons players become villains, and not every villain is built the same. So I broke it down to 4 categories to keep things simple. The 4 categories of villains that I built were the imperative, the wannabes, the deserving, and the middle ground. So let's start with the imperative. The 2 examples I have for the imperative are Patrick Beverley and Dillon Brooks. Both of these guys often receive criticism for not being stars on the court but continuing to be vocal. I use the word imperative because although these 2 get criticism for being disruptors, it's essential to their game and the way that they are. Let's talk about Patrick Beverley. Beverley was a really solid player for Arkansas at college, and his furious style of play had him fighting for the Wooden and Naismith Awards after his sophomore year of college. Beverley planned to come back to the Razorbacks for his junior season, but was forced to be ineligible after being suspended for having someone else write a paper for him. He opted to play overseas due to his suspension, where he was one of the best players in the Ukrainian basketball league. Although he was lighting up the competition, the change of scenery and scouts' worries about his character forced him to fall to the 42nd pick in the 2009 NBA draft. He was traded to the Heat the day after the draft and was eventually cut, which resulted in him going back overseas to find some playing time. He continued his playing career in the Greek League and the Euro League, until eventually coming to a deal with the Rockets in 2013. After securing his spot in the NBA, he fought through injury and eventually secured roles for the Rockets, and then the Clippers, Timberwolves, Lakers, Bulls, and soon to be the 76ers. With Beverley's uncommon route to the league, it was imperative that he kept a high level of energy and battled even when his back was against the wall. As an undersized guard without a strong offensive game, Beverley's best trait is that he's a vocal leader and the ultimate competitor. If Beverley wasn't this way, he probably never would have made the NBA, so I give him a lot of credit for being the way he is. Now let's talk about Dillon Brooks. Dillon Brooks is the modern day villain on a lot of people's mind right now. Similar to Beverley, Brooks went with pick 45 in the 2017 draft, and he also had to fight through injuries in his early career before cementing himself a spot as a Grizzlies starter. Brooks was an essential piece for a young Grizzlies team exiting the grit and grind era that made their team so special. This Grizzlies team was built to play high-energy, unapologetic basketball every night. Despite Brooks not being the team's best player, I think people have to remember he was a vet in that team's locker room. And if you missed it, Brooks got a lot of flack this year for calling out LeBron James in the first round of the playoffs. As LeBron usually does, he proved the haters wrong and the Lakers easily handled Memphis. But with the Grizzlies missing Morant, who is usually their vocal leader, I think Brooks felt like he had to step up and be the face of a gritty Grizzlies team. And even though it aged poorly, I think it was imperative for Brooks to take on a villain role in that moment, so I also respect him for that. The next type of villain I want to talk about is the wannabe. This is a player who is not deserving of being a villain, but desperately wants to be. And I'm warning you, Phoenix Suns fans, you might just want to click off the video now. My prime example of a wannabe villain is Devin Booker. Devin Booker is a unique example of a player who is trying to force themselves into a villain role. A lot of the time when a player tries to make themselves a villain, it is out of necessity. Their play just isn't up to a higher standard, so they need to add value to themselves by being an aggravator on the court. Devin Booker is not in that category. Unlike guys like Beverley and Brooks, who I just mentioned, who had to fight to even make NBA rosters and earn their spots, Devin Booker was giving everything he wanted the moment he was drafted. For being a guy who went 13th overall in 2015, he was immediately given minutes and a starting spot on his team. The Suns were very bad, and Booker is a really good player, so I'm not saying it wasn't deserved, but it's clear he didn't have to fight for much early in his career. Devin Booker grew as a player on a very bad Suns team that didn't compete until they solidified the head coaching problem when they got Monty Williams. And with Monty, they acquired Chris Paul, Bridges, and they developed Ayton, a roster that was built for a championship run. The roster did exactly that, but they came up short, which is fine for Booker's legacy. He's still young. But I guess this also makes me feel like it's unjust for him to try to portray himself as a villain. He built confidence on a very bad team and still couldn't convert when they put a competent squad around him. A lot of the guys he's been consistently in beef with have proved much more than him. Paul George was an MVP candidate for a good stretch, and he has a legitimate argument for being a top 3 player in Indiana Pacers franchise history. Klay Thompson, although admitting it was a little corny when he said this, he does have 4 rings, so he can back up any shit talking that he does. Luka Doncic is another unproven young guard, but I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I say he's going to be a much better player than Booker ever will be. Devin Booker wanting to be a villain is fun for some people, but I just can't take a dude seriously who acts like their back is up against the wall after his team just got KD and Beal. Not to mention, they fired one of the best coaches in the league just so they could hire a guy that Booker likes more. I can't take it seriously. Alright, enough slandering Booker for one video. The next category I have is the deserving. These are guys who have been filled in as villains, whether they like it or not, but these guys have embraced their villain role, and I consider them real villains of the NBA because I think they've earned it. Let's start with Jimmy Butler. I'll make this one quick. Jimmy is a villain because he shows up at the most crucial times and unapologetically kills your favorite squad. He doesn't seek out attention and claim to be the NBA's villain, but he just works harder than everyone else and isn't afraid of playing tough. I think it's fair to not consider Jimmy a villain because he's very well respected amongst NBA fans, but there is an argument for it, especially considering his past of going after his own teammates. Next, I want to talk about Draymond Green. Some may file Draymond into the imperative category, as I think it would be fair to say he has to be a villain to be his most effective, but unlike guys like Brooks and Beverly, Draymond's ability on the court makes him much more deserving. Despite playing with all-time greats like Curry, Klay, and Durant, there is no denying that Draymond was a huge reason that those Warriors teams reached the heights that they did in their prime. Draymond has accolades outside of his rings though. He's a multiple-time Defensive Player of the Year and has had multiple All-Star seasons. Whether you're a fan of Draymond or not, there's no denying that his play makes him deserving of the villain label. And lastly, for the deserving, I do want to talk about Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant forced himself into a villain role when he opted to leave his career-long squad in Oklahoma City and join a stacked Warriors team. But his game also proves he's a villain. Most NBA fans would be lying if they said KD had never pieced up their favorite team or embarrassed their favorite player. And a lot of fans respect him for that. But we can't lie and say a majority of NBA viewers don't see him as a traitor who took an easy route to a championship. For those reasons and his incredible level of play, he is considered a villain by many. For those reasons, I think KD is deserving of the villain tag. And the last group of guys I want to talk about is the middle ground. And the 2 guys I'll bring up here are LeBron James and Trae Young. Alright, first, let's talk about LeBron. Similar to KD, LeBron is one of the best players to ever play the game, if not just the best. So when he left the hometown Cavs to compete for rings on a stacked Miami Heat team, it left a lot of people with a bad taste in their mouth. The difference between LeBron and KD that puts them in different tiers is that LeBron went back to Cleveland to win his hometown squad a ring in one of the most iconic finals ever. And more than KD, LeBron is a hero to a whole generation of basketball players. So, although a lot of people will see LeBron as a villain for decades to come, I think a lot of folks see him as the GOAT and the hero of the NBA, so that puts him in a middle ground for me. And it wouldn't really be a villains video in the 2020s if I didn't talk about Trae Young. Trae Young is an interesting case because he was thrown into the villain role quickly during his playoff series against the Knicks. Trae is mostly a villain to New York fans, and while he's embraced the role in totality, he still has a lot more basketball to play before he's really a villain. Unlike someone like Booker, I don't think Trae is trying to force himself into that role, but he does embrace it when the lights are bright. Because there's a level of uncertainty there, and I think we're really just going to have to wait and see what the future holds for Trae, I think the middle ground is a fair place to put him when we're talking about NBA villains. With all that being said, I know this might be a controversial video, so please let me know in the comments who your favorite NBA villains and heroes are, and let me know if I got a bad read on one of these guys. We're happy to be back, and we really appreciate the love you're still showing on the channel. We'll see you guys for the next one. Peace out.